I am so ready. Countdown, 3.
I don't know how those companies effectively stay in business in the future.
What you two are doing is a boundless mindset.
Thinking that you weren't going to have to learn a lot. Well, you made a huge mistake.
There's one place I feel safe geeking out is
It's
here.
here.
There's a reason why we chose technology, not marketing.
Welcome back to the CIO Project. This is show number 2 in the year 2026, and we are coming to you live from I'm going to call it our 4th studio project right now. So I think those of you who have followed us know that we have bounced from studio to studio. We've been trying out all the right things, and we finally just said, you know what, we need to take control of this thing and put the control of the studio into our own hands. And so we've actually built out the basement professional studio. So you can see our fancy schmancy, handy dandy, trusted justy, super duper deluxe mics in front of us, the headphones, the whole bit. And this is definitely a work in progress. Every time we try something, there's new cables, there's new tech, there's new what would you call it? Witches to have to overcome.
Hey, Jim was thoughtful enough to be like our test case kind of thing, which is terrific.
Happy to be.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we're right on, everybody. We have a really exciting guest that we're going to introduce to you here in just a moment. But first, if you get value from this show, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Our research actually shows that we have a lot of people that are actually listening and watching, and we're publishing on 3 different platforms. We're publishing on YouTube, we're publishing on Spotify, and we are publishing on Apple Podcasts. And so one of the things that we have been told statistically is actually more than 60% of the people that listen to us don't actually subscribe. So it would really, really be a great thing if you could actually hit that subscribe button for us, give us the thumbs up, and share it with at least 2 of your colleagues who think you might also, or who you think might also get value from this. We really appreciate that. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, CIO extraordinaire, Mr. Brian Shield, CIO Safeguard Products International. Brian.
Hey, great to be here in our new fancy, studio. So we're very excited, as Howie said, and we've got an incredibly great guest today. One of the best parts of doing this podcast is getting a chance to spend time with really exceptional, talented people, and today's no exception. So very much look forward to spending time with our great guest, Jim Chilton.
And I'm going to leave you guys on I'm going to put you guys on pause on that for one more second and just tell everybody not to forget that you can find us at thecioproject.com. Watch our released episodes there, learn more about our hosts and guests, and drop us a line with any questions or topics you would like us to tackle in our upcoming episodes, as well as ideas and suggestions you have for the show. So again, that is thecioproject.com. So with all of that said, let's get into it. And I'd like to introduce you to our guest today, Mr. Jim Chilton. Jim Chilton is a technology executive, independent advisor, board director, and author with 25 plus years of experience spanning 6 CTO and CIO roles. Most recently, EVP and CTO at a $1.5 billion education technology company, where he led a 650-person global organization through a major AI and enterprise transformation. So we're going to definitely want to hear more about that, especially in this day and age where things are moving so fast. Jim now advises private equity firms and boards through Jim Chilton Advisory current engagements. He now advises private equity firms and boards. And through Jim Chilton Advisory, his current engagements include Nexus Capital, Bain Capital, InnoCap, and Imagine? It's Imagine.
I manage.
All right. Jim serves on the board of trustees at Southern New Hampshire University as investment committee chair, overseeing the technology and education company investments there. He is vice chair of Boston CIO and has served on the boards of, is it One EdTech Consortium? Is that how you
One
say it?
EdTech, yep.
All right. Dreamscape Learn, MassShire.gov, and Matter, and Space. Jim also holds advisory board roles with Atolio and Cloud Zero. He is the author of Enterprise Coherence, a book that he recently has published that I'm really excited to talk about today. So in the age of AI, the macro process wheel, the MPW framework, which reached #1 new release in management information systems on Amazon and was named to the National CIO Review CIO bookshelf. That's cool. He holds 2 AI patents, and he was named the 2020 Boston CIO of the Year and has been a National CIO of the Year finalist. Jim has spoken at TEDx SNHU and ASU GSV and contributes regularly to the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and the National CIO Review. And he lives in Hollis, New Hampshire. Whew, that's a mouthful, Jim. Welcome to the show.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing. I'd love to meet that guy.
You have half of that
Uh,
stuff, sir, Jim. It's like
yeah,
amazing.
exactly. Yeah.
Give us kind of a, superhuman origin story of how you got from, because we actually have a lot of listeners who aren't actually technology executives, but are aspiring to be, and so they love to hear the origin story of someone who is so accomplished as you are.
Oh, well, thank you. I think it's interesting. I started at computer printers at the beginning of my career. And so a company called Data Products. And if you remember like dot matrix printers and daisy wheel printers and laser printers,
All too
um,
well.
They do.
yeah, and one of the more interesting projects was I actually helped and created the very first American Airlines ticket printer. So when you think about the Sabre system, and so my initial focus was as a mechanical engineer. I started off that way and focused almost exclusively my first 2 years in college around mechanical engineering, and then swapped over to computer science when mechanical engineering got really hard. so um, and computer science got yeah, yeah. And so it's a I think what I realized is that that transition in the early 90s as you started to shift from real hardware providers into software, and that's when I made my move into software and technologies. And I had a great time transitioning over so that you really it was the origin, if you will, of information services as people were just starting to understand like, hey, every company is going to need this IS like leader and this IT, like somebody's got to keep the computers working. And it's a yeah, that was my transition point, and it conveniently started when I was actually in high school. I did some after I went through all the math curriculum. My senior year, I did basic programming on the Apple IIe, and when I worked at this printer company, we were working on the assembly lines for IBM, creating their dot matrix printers, and they didn't know how to use what they called the toy computers, and I knew how to use the toy computers. So that was a great segue. So my high school basic programming really got me my first job in software, which was, can we test these printers somehow? And all the engineers there were like, we know how to do, Wang and PDP-11 and DEC machines. They had no idea how to use an IBM PC or an Apple. So, yeah, the toy computers paid off.
Wow, wow. So walk us through a little bit. So your journey toward a more senior level and IT executive.
Yeah, so I think it started all there, but I think the transition became pretty gradual after that. Is that as I moved across industries, Brian, is that evolving need around business systems and information technology. As I moved, I went from over to hardware and manufacturing into biomedical space. I spent some time at a company called PB Diagnostics, um, and working on their ERP system. And then we started doing merger and acquisitions to bring in other companies into that. Um, we grew from zero in revenue. It was a venture capital event between Polaroid when they were still around and Beringwerker, and brought those together. Jumping out of kind of computer printer technology into business systems actually started at a printer company that I was working at. And because I became the demo person leveraging software to test the printers. I was working at a startup company that was up by Dartmouth College. It was a think tank, and we had an investment from Apple, Compaq, and Brother to create this new color inkjet printer. And it was to be the first in the world. It was before the Hewlett Packard DeskJet. And so this was this amazing opportunity. And that was my first segue into real software and systems. As I started to move out of there, I worked into the next company, which was this biomedical company that was a joint venture between Polaroid and Beringwerker, which is kind of the Johnson and Johnson of Germany, right? This multi-billion-dollar company in the medical space, and we were creating immunoassay systems, and I was able to lead kind of their network infrastructure and communications, and then graduated my way into leading information services and information technology for that company. So that was kind of that was the pivot point. So I kind of graduated out of hardware into software and leading in the IS role. Um, from there, it was sequential roles of doing that type of work, back-to-back companies, implementing software, integrating companies as we acquired them. So it became kind of steady state.
And we'd like CEO at those respective times.
Yeah. So as I was kind of vice president of IT, vice president of IS, and and then as I moved up in the food chain, I ended up at a company in New Hampshire called Coda. And Coda was a software company that was eventually acquired by Bon. And many people remember Bon in those days. And but we built exclusively financial software. And I joined there as the CIO. And we were still doing client server technology. So 6 months, 8 months in, they had me take over the technology consulting organization that was implementing client server Oracle databases, SQL databases at the clients because the regular professional services team, like, what the hell do we do with these people? Like, their technology is a pain. Like, I don't understand this. And so then I ended up having the CIO role and this technology professional services group. Yeah. So, and at night, I'm working on my MBA. So, like, it's perfect. Like, I'm literally learning at night about the P&L responsibility and what I should be doing. You fast forward another year, they give me the whole consulting group. So now I'm running North American consulting for this group. I've got all these business consultants and these technology consultants implementing financial software for Corning Pharmaceuticals, Ingersoll Rand, Amway, Caterpillar, like real big brand name companies. Um, I am the youngest guy by far. I've got a fleet of consultants who have tons of experience, more than I do. Um, and I try to really win over this team with, I'm going to focus on how we can make this actually a profitable entity. Because no matter how we were doing it, we were losing money on like every implementation. And I'm sitting there going, this makes no sense. And so they really had no methodology around the implementation. So you think about like as we as professionals all do that now, it was like they would do like the minimum sufficiency, like send this consultant out for a 2-day engagement. I'm like, this makes no sense. We're making like it's just not working. So I ended up partnering with Grant Thornton, outsourcing those things we could not make money at, really focusing on training and certifying implementations. So getting away from this notion of we're going to do all the implementations and getting in the business of certifying them at different milestones. And of course, we would charge the third party for our guys to do that. So
Now,
great
that's a great
opportunity.
story
My
too, though, because
first.
it's Jim, because there's so many people who listen to this, as you know, like as even as successful, IT leaders and things, it's oftentimes really difficult to get that revenue experience and like
Mhm.
driving revenue. It's if you're listening to this, there's many very, very successful CIOs and other, technology leaders, but they struggle sometimes making that effective transition, if you will, at the most senior levels or the board levels and other things, because even today, they're somewhat labeled as sort of technology only people versus, someone like yourself who's, ran a P&L type of thing. So that's terrific stuff that you can do that early enough in your
Yeah,
career.
yeah. Yeah, it was the first chance I got to do it, Brian. And I've talked with many of my peers over the years, and I do think that that was a breakaway point for me that only later in my career have I realized. I've got to do it 3 times now in my career. And it's truly a differentiator when it comes to the board and advisory work to be able to talk about stepping into those seats and also having a better understanding of what does it mean when you step into those roles to deal with the policies and procedures we've put in as the CIO. I really have figured that when I went over to run the InfoSec Institute, kind of I ran that as a president, and I wasn't in the job for 2 months and I was fighting with my own policies around marketing technologies and all of these things as I'm trying to generate leads and build the pipe. I'm like, what are all these blocking things? And they were things that I had put upon the company. And so it's really great. I would encourage the listeners if you ever get the chance, no matter how small, to participate, be part of a P&L, jump at it. Don't walk, run to that opportunity.
I couldn't agree more. As we were saying just a moment ago, it is
Mm,
such a differentiator. Just because
mm,
it builds. It's so interesting because it may not be a fundamental difference, if you will, in some levels, if this is a small portion of your overall job, but like to others who look at you, this is like so important to be able to say like, oh my gosh, you ring a P&L. Everyone just kind of like you get 3 extra check marks next to your name, type of thing.
mm,
So I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, I would think too, I mean, as we've been doing the show and talking to different people, it has emerged that CTO and CIO roles that there is a lot of aspiration to go to the CEO level today, where like I feel like that wasn't talked about so much a decade ago or 20 years ago, right? The CIO level was
Yeah.
kind of as high as you were going to go at that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, it's and again, yeah, there's examples of it. There's some certainly think of like American Express. There's companies where the business of the business is IS and IT, and American Express is a great example of that, where their CIO becomes their CEO. And so I do think it's interesting. The other part of it that I've always been a fan of is that, as you point out, Howie, it's you to do this job, to be a CIO or a CTO, you often have to know how the entire company works, right? And that is super valuable and very unique. And as you go across the executive team, and you can start to realize like who understands cradle to grave the intimacy of how this machine actually works. And all of a sudden, there's very few people at the table that can stand up and say, I do. And I think that's an important part of the role. And I think it's an asset that a lot of CIOs overlook about themselves, that they don't understand that their job is truly as an enterprise architect, not in the today form of an enterprise architect, but the traditional role where an enterprise architect understood how everything worked and how everything was connected.
Yeah, it is amazing. Well, Howie and I talk about this all the time too, and we've had others on this call where we had these kind of similar conversations, Jim, where it's like it's remarkable to me how few senior level executives understand how the sausage is made in a company. And I remember being at the Weather Channel, and I remember one time going to a whiteboard and drawing a picture of the metaphorical iceberg. And I said, like just understanding what's above the water line here, this 10% is not sufficient. Like that might be fine for some elements of our business, but other elements, you got to go down to like 30%. And, if we're building at the time, like, websites and mobile apps and a lot of very kind of complex technologies, it wasn't sufficient just to be able to kind of trust your CIO or CTO type of thing, And so, but what's been interesting, Jim? I know we'll segue to some moment, but like AI, I think is changing that too, because since AI democratizes so much, across the organization, it's forcing now your average, person who could be in marketing or HR or finance or you name it, to have to understand the data and have to understand elements of, how to get access to it, and obviously experiment with different AI tools. And I know we're going to talk a lot about that, given your really successful career, especially in the areas of AI in more recent years. But so I think it's going to change, but I think that historically has been a major, I don't know, impediment, and oftentimes to like senior level leaders. And if you think of our jobs, Jim, I mean, I was telling Howie, I think I'm going to change my job title to like, I don't know, chief information orchestrator, because like, oh my goodness, how much of your time now is spent, you know, corralling information and trying to help like, get your arms around sort of all the never ending sort of AI cycle that we all kind of deal with as we try to make it more pervasive.
This
Yeah.
understanding of the cross-functional way the business is done is really a great segue into your book, right? So you talk a little bit,
Yeah.
you talk a lot, actually,
Yeah.
a little bit. You talk a
Uh,
lot about this,
uh,
distinctions between macro processes and microprocesses. And so I'd love to jump into that with you a little bit and, maybe bring
yeah.
us to,
Yeah.
maybe kind of bring us around to how you got to that and, talk to us about
Yeah.
the differences. I do have a couple questions.
Before we dive into that, if I could just ask Jim, so
Yeah.
give us the idea, like what made you decide to write a book, and a little bit of the
Uh,
backstory here a little bit, and then we could dive
yeah.
right
So,
in.
a couple of things. So that when I went to work at this large global education and technology company, which historically had been a 100-year-old publisher, when I took the job, I was like, okay, this would be the fifth or sixth time I've done this exact job. I'm like, I really need to take all my notes that I've written down about everything that I've done. And if I'm ever going to publish something, now's the time. Like I'm going to be covered by books everywhere. So now's the time. So went into it committed to do that. And I wrote my actual first book there. We were looking at doing a big merger with an equivalent company. The Department of Justice stepped in and said, you guys can't merge. But I had created a book that was going to be a playbook for all of the IT and IS and technology people about how we operated. What were the frameworks we used? What were the principles that we believed? What rubrics did we use for selecting software and technology? Right? I have a bunch of frameworks, and I put together what I thought was this really cool playbook. And I shared it with some people and be like, hey, I wrote a book. And they're like, that is awful. And it was like, and I'm like, oh geez. And I'm like, well, what's so wrong with it? Like, you're telling somebody basically how you've done your job and how they should do your job. And I was like, oh, that's a bad thing. And so it was the idea of like, you should take one or two of those frameworks and explain the story behind how they actually work. And so I took that advice and created, Enterprise Coherence in the Age of AI, which is the book that I've now worked on and released. And we get the hardcover coming in a month, but the paperback's out there at Amazon. And
Yeah, and if you missed it, here he is, another little
yeah, there you go.
looks
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it's good looking
yeah,
book,
yeah,
and
yeah, good looking book.
I
Yeah,
got it on
I
Kindle.
get 217 amazing pages. That was incredible. And I think for me, this was the inverse of what the title was. So the title became polite. I talk about that in the book, is that I find, and I suspect you two do as well, is that when we walk into these jobs, I find them to be incoherent. And so it was, for me, it started the other way. I was like, this is the incoherent enterprise. Like, every time you hire somebody like us to go in, you're talking about a business that doesn't understand how the parts are connected. You've got to figure out where the mess is. Like, so it's really like our job is about building coherence. And so that became the shift of what's the right way to do this is, if we could create enterprises that are coherent and aligned and structured, we have such a better chance of actually leveraging AI than if we don't. Because what's been clear is, if you leave it the other way and you ladder more and more AI and technology on top of it, it is just going to highlight the deficiencies and the problems of your business, which is actually going to be worse for us as leaders, because then people will be like, great news is I implemented AI. The bad news is our data, our systems and processes is so nauseatingly bad, it isn't going to allow us to function. And that is not what your CEO or the board wants to hear. And they won't understand it, by the way. They will think it's a problem you created rather than a problem you cleared up. So that became the catalyst. And full transparency, Howie, is that I started the work on macro processes in 2008. I talk about that. I worked for a large software company, enterprise software company that was headquartered out of France. Every time I went there, I'd always stay at the same place, largely because I'm an introvert, and because Starbucks was like right beneath the hotel.
Wait,
And
I have to
so,
say it. You're going to France, where like
yeah.
part of the world that's known for their coffee, but you're staying
Oh yeah,
next to a
yeah. Oh my
Starbucks.
God, yeah. And it's funny. I don't even drink coffee. It's just for my green tea. But I do drink Starbucks green tea still.
Jim and
And
I are green tea people.
Yeah, you guys are tea people.
yeah, 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 exactly. And so I'm doing this. It's 08, 09. If you remember, kind of the world markets aren't doing so great. Pressures on businesses. The parent company decides, hey, us being a conglomerate of software companies is over. We want to take all the acquisitions we've done for the last 10 or 12 years and bring them together. And so the leader of the company I worked for, the CEO of SolidWorks at the time, was like, Jim's your guy. So he should be the guy that leads this for the parent company. So I get tapped on the shoulder to do this, and I'm like, great. So I'm over there trying to figure out how do we ingest and bring all of these companies and their systems and things together. And we're going through this, like, we got a week of like 12-hour days. All of us have done this stuff. And all we can do is fight about who has a better version of Oracle or PeopleSoft. I mean, it was awful, right? It's like, no, my part is better than yours. It's more current. It's less customized. Like, we talked about every variation except for what the business actually was trying to do with the technology.
Were these
And so that,
disparate business units that were being put together?
yeah, yeah. And so the idea was that we have to take all of them, bring them in together, and make a more comprehensive, not just a product, but an actual product company. Because the parent company, all of our sales and all of our service was done by IBM. And so it was a division of IBM called PLM, for Product Lifecycle Management. And we sold to the largest aerospace and automotive companies in the world but it was all done through IBM. At this juncture, we decided to buy that chunk of IBM and bring it all in house. That was also part of this integration. So I'm taking all of these parts together to try to create a functioning software company. And it's an amazing opportunity. And again, the challenge was, can we get ourselves focused on the business, not the toys and technology that we have surrounding the business that have been selected by everybody and then some over the last 2 decades. So that became, but I didn't realize it at the time, Howie. And so for me, I knew I was doing it. I started to leverage it. It was only when I was later in my career, as I started working and doing more merger and acquisition based events, I was like, oh my God, this thing is what we need to be doing every time. And that's became the kind of the ladder for it. And just being clear of saying, if you can build out and help people understand beyond functions, because right now when you think about it and kind of a basic people think about organizational structure, right? So you can go into a company and be like, you have marketing, you have sales, depending on your business, you could have operations, right? You have software development, like you know what your organization functions are. And then traditionally we go right from those functions, a direct line to SAP, to Salesforce, to whatever. Like we don't we don't even correlate like what the hell are they doing, right? And so the whole principle behind this is to try to provide some structure and clarity and visibility to what happens outside of that circle of the functions.
Yeah. So so your lesson in Paris or wherever you were in France, like has
Yeah.
gave you these sort of best practices.
Yeah, yeah, and it did, and it's something that served me remarkably well. And I know for many others that I think that we're able to kind of leverage this. But as I started to study it, what I realized, Brian, is that outside of a couple academic leaders throughout the world, a couple at UC Berkeley, had really studied what a macro process was and why it matters. And I think that one of the things that was, I dare say, an epiphany, but the notion of thinking of layers. So you've got that central layer of your corporate functions, the farthest out external layer of the actual technologies we use, and you start to ladder up and go like, where we really get ourselves in trouble after the functions is what I call enterprise processes. And those are processes that transcend functions. So you think about like order to cash. It's notorious for this, right? Order to cash doesn't sit just in finance or in order management. If you add lead to cash, it gets even deeper into marketing. And that's where you start to get problems. You got to have this process that transcends leaders, transcends groups. And then beneath that, you have macro process like, how do we do lead conversions? How do we do that? Gets very clear. People like, hey, that's my world. I know how to generate leads. Sales like, hey, I know how to close business. Order management, I know how to take that order. Finance, I know how to collect, right? They all know how to do their their part of the macro process. And then they get the micro process, like this accounts payable clerk is doing this, pressing this button to collect that. And she or he is doing it on this system. It's SAP, right? So for me, it was about how do I get all of that structure there so it's clear, knowing that the real challenge, the real gotcha point is around those enterprise processes because that's where all the fighting occurs.
Interesting.
Everybody wants to own their
So
thing.
the the enterprise process is cross organizational. It's cross functional, but the
Yeah,
macro process lives within the functional silo.
it can. And those two, this is where it gets really interesting, Howie, depending on, and I've done this for a bunch of companies now. So as you look at the different industries and different companies, you will find that some actually can sit beside them depending on how the company is structured, or depending how the institution is structured. I've done this with actually some higher ed universities as well. So it is a completely industry agnostic. You can apply this anywhere. But I think that what you can see with the processes is that clarity of association to the outcome, and where ownership does. It does two things. Is one, it gives us as technology leaders clarity about what we should be seeking. If we're going into a situation and they're saying, just ladder on some more technology on the outside, because that's what I, as the head of function X, need. We've been doing that. We've been doing that for a long time. Now I think we've got the position to go back and say, to do what? And does your counterpart that supports that process, again, using order to cash as an example, is your fellow functions with you on this? Do they understand what it means for what you're saying? And how do we associate the right tools to do that work? Now, as someone who is Hmm. Yeah. 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 It's exactly right. Because what I was seeing with AI in particular, Brian, was that it was being stacked upon on that outer layer of technology. So you think about, again, let's call it Salesforce, SAP, pick your poison, right? Same on the product side. The vendors are doing a brilliant job, as was the technologist, of like, I want to pack this on top of. So this wasn't in replacement of, this is on top of. And then the question would be is, how will you do something with that as it starts to need to exist or coexist with these other components? And what we were doing is declaring success way too early on kind of that microprocess level. As an example, it'd be like, we've got a call center. The call center now has autonomous agents. They're going to answer all your problems. Be like, great. Technology works. Technology has access to the information. Great news. One of the things that the customer is asking for is, how many of these things do I own? Oh, oh shucks, I got to go into that godforsaken ERP system. I got to look up Brian Shields and Howie, figure out what licenses you've got, what products do you have, what rights do you have, how much subscription are you current? Did you guys expire? Did you give some seats back? All of a sudden now you're like, well, can you guys just let me in there? Like, oh, with what? No, well, our new whiz bang AI technology that we bought last week. Like, absolutely not. This is Sarbanes-Oxley compliance alone. Like, no, guys, you can't go play here. And so all of a sudden you get to this place where you realize, as you actually pull on even these small use cases, interdependency and connectivity is critical. And I've heard people reference it to data, which again, you could marginalize it. It's both data and system access, right? You need to be able to transition through those, and you need to make sure that you have the licensing and the rights that go along with that query. Because the other part of this is saying, as I transcend systems, I need the security to persist as I make my way through that. So now you've got an autonomous agent with unlimited autonomous access. You're like, okay, now we start to have a problem. And this is a problem with us in this role is really hard to fight off, because now you're the resistance. How are you not letting my AI project move forward? You're like, have you lost your mind? Like, you can't take this random technology, let it just transcend it. The damage it could do without governance and structure and guardrails could be profound to the business.
Right. So take
So,
us through sort of like, you learned obviously a tremendous amount, and Jim and I have known each other for many years in the Boston area.
mm,
And he's always been a role model, I think,
mm,
both for myself, but also just at Boston CIO and
mm,
really kind of across the Inspire CIO kind of network, in sort of your early opportunities of working with AI much sooner than
mm,
most companies and much more aggressively. I was always kind of impressed by
mm,
we were at different times kind of moving at a glacial pace, and
mm.
you were moving at a very rapid alternative, and I was
Yeah.
like jealous in some respects of your ability to kind of navigate that. So given that what you learned, I mean, like, give us some best practices. So there's a lot of companies, and we all read about it.
Yeah.
Different companies are at different stages, obviously. But when you think about sort of, you reference at the end there, governance, and you think about, the do's and the don'ts, and like, what do you
Mhm.
need to do to effectively set up an environment so that your organization can be effective with leveraging AI?
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of things. I think that, and Brian, you and I exchanged this with the many of the Boston CIO leaders in the beginning, which is like, there's five basic pillars that I think every technology leader should have around AI, that gets into what are we doing inside the company, both from training and tools. What have we vetted and validated? What do we want you to do? What don't we want you to do? Don't put your taxes in this instance. Don't put the company intellectual property in external instances, right? So I was working for a content company at the time. And the most important thing for me out of the gate was like, I can't take royalty bearing information that we are getting from authors and allow employees to go put this out in open AI. Like, this is a bad thing. And so I think for us, we had to have some guardrails very, very quickly about what we want employees to do and how do we train them and educate them and provide them tools, though, because we wanted them to use the tools, right? The second part is about, what are you doing with this and how does it fit into your product structure? If you have a product or any customer facing capability is technology based, be like, what are you doing with this and how is it going to work and what's the impact of that? The third part is making sure that you've got whatever your governance and legal structure is, right? So copyright law was a big thing for us, and it's still being all over the place with the systems around what does this look like. But you have to be mindful of your industry, if you're HIPAA compliant, et cetera, et cetera. You got to be mindful of those things. So having some framework and structure around these, then getting, of course, into what do you do for cybersecurity around this components, the risk that comes with these tools, where are the tools coming in from, how are you navigating what you are? Try to make those choices and get that there. I think then the final one is, what are you communicating on your progress? What is that final pillar? This is where you want the holy grail of, what are we doing that's an experiment? What are we doing that's a project? And what are we doing as execution, right? And I think I want people to experiment. What I don't want to do, and too many people have done this, is they go from experimentation to, I got a widget working. I'm super excited about the widget. I'm going to tell the president, who's going to tell the board. Don't do it, right? And that's where you really get yourself in trouble.
Well,
And
I
so
think
I
that's
think
like
it's,
going, like we were talking about this earlier this week. I think even today, like the pace of this and how many people the technology is in their hands today that wasn't in the past is just frenetic at this point, right?
Mhm.
Like
Oh my
you can
God,
just
yeah.
feel the anxiety in the air where people are just so excited and you almost wake up feeling like I must have fallen behind last night while I was asleep because
Mm. Oh
everybody's
yeah,
moving
yeah,
so fast with this stuff.
yeah.
And so the
Well, and
scenario that you
yeah,
just laid out is so
yeah,
real.
yeah. And I think, Howie, you're spot on. And I think what I was advocating for, and I continue to advocate for the companies I'm helping now, is to make sure that you embrace experimentation. What you don't want it to do, and I've had some feedback even on some of my recommendations around having framework and structure around doing this, is saying, so you're saying you shouldn't do anything with AI until you get your macro process wheel built. And I'm like, well, first of all, it doesn't take that long to create a macro process wheel. Second is that you should absolutely be experimenting, and you should be helping all of your employees experiment, and you should do this with some context about what are you doing and how are you communicating that progress. And so I think this kind of this last pillar is, have a systematic way how you're updating the executive team, how you're carrying them along this journey, and the same thing with your board. This should not be an accident about how you communicate. It should be a mindful, current, transparent update of, we're trying these things, we're learning some stuff, we're deciding about what things make area for investment. And when we get to real execution, we're going to come back with a justification like we would for any other major project about, we invest this, we believe we'll get this outcome. We have a hypothesis behind this investment, and we're going to learn and iterate and revolve and evolve that hypothesis. That scientific approach must be done with this, right? And I think that's when you get to real scale around what to do with AI. And what I'm suggesting in the book is to reinforce that by actually understanding how your company works before you put yourself in that predicament. Because too often I've talked to people and they just don't know how the company actually functions. Like literally do not know. And so I think that was two things when I was doing the book, is I made both a website and the book. The website's called Macro Process Wheel, and you can go out there and create your own. And there's a little AI agent that's going to help you there. You're saying, here's my industry. So I'm in the insurance industry. It's going to help you pick the right functions. It's going to help you pick the most likely macro processes you have. So I'm going to carry you a lot of the way there, but it gives you a visual that you can then go back to leadership with. And this is kind of where the book gets valuable, is I want you to go back to your leaders and then say, okay, here's our world. This is how everything happens at this company. And here's an image of that. My question of leadership now, where do we have to be great? Where do we have to be good? When I say great, I mean intellectual property, differentiation for the business. It matters to us. And when I say good, I mean maybe what technology we use to do collections doesn't really matter quite so much. So then we do the next layer, and this is where the AI layer really kind of comes on strong, which is like, now that you can understand where's good and what is great, you can determine where you want to fully automate with AI, likely in the good area, because you're like, this is not a competitive differentiator for us. Let's go focus on how we can automate. So now let's experiment in areas that align to the business. And then where we say it's great, Let's talk about augmentation with AI. We don't want to just let it go run amok. We want to have some involvement and understanding because this is the intellectual property of the company. We want to have our hands in there. And what I've seen is companies that are picking what is interesting based under what's available to them and what's sold to them, not about how they fit with their own wheel.
Yeah, it's great feedback. We were having this conversation today at work, and in our worlds, our vernacular, we would call that what are our moats? Like, what are some of the
Right.
areas, to your point, that like we have, competitive differentiation in some respects, or at least we believe we do. And but it's funny, Jim, what you were talking about. You go back to some comments that we were talking about earlier about like understanding how the sausage is made. Like the one
Mhm.
real benefit of the wheel metaphor, and if you think about it, is that it kind of forces everyone now to kind of have an awareness.
Mhm.
That these are oftentimes just the domain of folks like us who, had the jobs of understanding the underpinnings. But now it's
Mhm.
like those things are pivotal, right? And it's like
Yeah.
it also, because once you understand the underpinnings, at least at a macro level, you now can have really intelligent conversation about the quality of data or other
Mhm.
sort of elements that you could say like, hey, these are areas where we aspire to be a 5 on a 5 scale. Well, our data is only a 3. So
Yeah.
like, you know what I'm
Exactly.
saying? Like, and so
Oh yeah.
it allows you to kind of like create a timeline of like,
Yeah.
okay, we aspire to get to this, but we're not prepared to get to that. So let's
Yeah. Yeah.
put that one over here and let's
Mhm.
focus on data quality and come back and
Yeah.
revisit there,
Yeah.
at some
Yeah. And I think
level.
I love that, Brian. I think one of the things that is optional that I've had a couple of places do is you start to rate after you've surveyed and understood these micro and macro processes is you start to rank your maturity and the status. And this gets into a deeper level that I get into in the book about process management. And so if you're saying that this area or this process is dead red, so we know that it's just something that is downright broken. Like it is not working. It is something that we need to address regardless of AI. Like it's just an area where we don't understand it well enough. We do some manumatic stuff. We don't do the same thing twice. It helps you illustrate where are those places that you want to investigate, both from an IT professional perspective, but also then from an AI perspective about going like, is this the opportunity we've been looking for to finally address this problem? Let's let it tackle that and see where it can get to. Right. But at least that way, these pilots that we're talking about before and these experiments are now at least targeted with some sort of logic as you think about your wheel and you're like, okay, so I've identified 27 microprocesses in the company where we just don't know how they work. It's just deficient. Like we don't actually know. Let's go attack those. Let's go understand them. Let's go see what we can do to automate those. So it gives you some focus. Then I go all the way back to where I think people are getting beaten up today by their CEOs and by the board is they're like, what are you doing with AI? Where are you with optimization? There is nothing better than a rock solid macro process wheel to say, this is what we've researched and discovered who we are. This is where we think it's important and we're doing some homework. Next quarter, we'll come back and give you some updates on where we are and how we're progressing against these objectives and against how AI fits into our business, not how we can leverage AI wherever it happens to pop up.
Yeah, out of curious, like, you do work for a lot of different companies. Obviously, you work,
Mhm.
as CTO for, 5 or 6 of these as
Yeah.
well. But when you think of that and you think about sort of the role of AI being kind of, more than just the IT organization now. Now, like, so we're
Mhm.
actively encouraging, the
Mhm.
business to play a more active role and things like that. Like in the example you just gave, and things like, what is the role of the business in that area vis-a-vis sort of the IT organization? Like, and is that a hybrid structure,
Yeah.
or is like, how do you sort of align
Yeah.
for success? So we get that question, Howie and I, sometimes when we
Yeah.
talk to folks that, no two companies are quite the same. And,
Yeah. I think
you know,
it's, yeah.
Can I actually add to that question? Because you're touching on something that's really yeah, eating at me a little bit on around this. Because my perception is, to add to what Brian's saying, is that the macro process wheel exercise is it's a cross functional thing. Therefore, it's probably best sponsored at the CEO level, correct? And so, how then does a CIO actually introduce this concept and then influence the rest of the organization vis-a-vis the CEO on down. So what is your advice around that whole?
It's actually a great point. Is that so? What I've seen work is a lot of organizations that I've worked with on this have started with the CIO because, as we described earlier, they're most likely to know. Most CIOs, enterprise architects, people in those roles, they will be able to fill out that wheel 80% on their own. They know what the parts are. Once you've done that, then it's a handoff with your COO or your transformation officer or somebody else. Where I've seen it work, and I'm working with one company right now that's doing it, where they've hired a separate department that are doing the deep dive in the research. They're doing interviews and they're going deep into like, hey, this is your area of the business. We're going to explore your macro processes. We want to understand how your business works. Basically, show us how you do your job. And they are doing that as a separate entity. And what you'll see, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this, I know I have, is that this ultimately leads towards accountability on global process ownership, which again, I think all of us have seen with some of these big implementations. Big multinational companies will often have a global order to cash process owner. They will own it in its entirety. And this advocates for that type of ownership. So the accountability doesn't rest with us as the technology leader. It actually rests with that person that we need to partner with. But I think what happens right now is that if we don't initiate this, it's such a big lift for people that don't know the intimacies of the business to even get started. And so if you go out and try the wheel that I built, that was the key thing. I'm like, I wanted to make this easy enough to be like, well, what functions might Brian's organization have? Like if he's in this industry, let me suggest some that will help get him started. And I'll give them some of the details. What likely would that function have for a macro process? So it helps really nudge you along. But I do think I see it as really a talking vehicle for the, because how could you argue once Brian's done it and he's brought it to his COO or his CEO, how could they possibly say, understanding how our business runs, Brian, is not important to me? Like, I don't know how anybody could say that.
Well, I think the other thing that happens, correct me if I'm wrong from your experience, but the what I found too is when it starts outside of the model you're describing in certain cases, and also it depends on the scale of the application and or the system you're trying to solve. But then it becomes highly iterative, right? Because
Mhm.
they can only get so far before they run into a roadblock, and it's all, oh,
Mhm.
we're having a problem accessing data. Oh, there's a data quality problem. Oh, there's, we don't really fully understand sort of the interdependency between multiple systems, and so, I understand your point about sort of like trying to establish sort of a consistent methodology, especially at the outset.
Yeah, yeah. I think what I've personally done, and I think it is super valuable, is that let's say that Brian, you and Howie do yours for kind of respective organization, and you bring it to the CEO, and it's call it 85% level. Like basically, I think this is how the company works. Mostly right. We'd have to do some research to validate it, but let's call it 85%. Tell me what's great. Tell me what has to be great for us to be successful as a business. The next 5 years of this business, of everything on this page, what is the most important moat or differentiating value that we need to have? Because instantly, you as the leader then are allowed to focus. Because some of this stuff where the problems lie, you may be like, actually, that's not really that important to us right now. The part that I know is critical to us is here. And that's where we need to put our time, effort, attention. And I think that's the part where I think it is such a great vehicle for that conversation. Because if you go to your leader now and you say, tell me what our moat is and what processes or parts of the company, they'll never say it. And they definitely won't say it in a public forum, because as you go back up to that center with the functions, they will never tell you that a function up there doesn't matter. Nobody wants to say, like, at this company, there's two functions that matter to me. And they're never going to say that. But this forces that conversation where at least you as the leader can be like, we should double down in these two areas because
Yeah, and also there's the
honestly,
thing, Jim,
that's what
too, even
matters.
if it's like, if these are your moat, let's call it, like these are our
Hmm.
comparative differentiations, right? I think the other element it does is it allows you to start to say things like, you know, what should be another additive moat for us?
Hmm.
Like, I mean, okay, maybe today it's on our list, but it should be. because it's another way to
Yeah.
kind of differentiate our company and those kinds of things. No, that's fascinating.
Exactly. Yeah.
I haven't quite finished the book. I'm probably 80% of the way through,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
loving it. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
for those listening to us, it's Jim is the consummate professional, and I think all of us in this day, especially in the age of AI, are all looking for sort of the blueprint,
Mm.
that kind of gets us there. So as we all look at AI as being an enabler, like Jim is the AI enabler for this for all of us.
The enabler
Yeah.
of the enablers, exactly.
Yeah.
So part of
Yeah.
what I was
I'm
hearing too, you were just talking to Jim, you and Brian, is that by taking the initiative to pick up the macro process wheel, the MPW, right? Taking the
Yeah.
initiative, picking it up on your own,
Yeah.
he or she CIO, filling it out, getting it kind of like working with your
Yeah.
people, getting it kind of to that, that point of that inflection point, whether it's 65%, 75%, 85%, and then
Yeah.
taking it to the CEO level and saying, here's what I'm working on. And then seeking the validation from the CEO is the way to get them engaged in the process.
Yeah.
That's part of what I'm hearing.
Oh, it's exactly right, and I love that, Howie. In the end of the book, I give some examples of real companies that I've worked with the names out, and there's one great example in there where it is three distinct business units who argued at length about why they were unique and different. And the macro process wheel for each of them was assembled and created, and it showed, to no surprise, that they were 90% similar. And that allowed me to go back and say, let's take a look at them. And we've done the research now. We understand the difference between them. One of them sells directly to customers, one of them sells through resellers, and one of them sells online. So those are your three sales motions at this company. Now let's examine of their entire business, what is unique. And what we discovered was unique was those three things. One of them sells directly for customers, and therefore their sales methodology and their sales process that they followed was different than those that were handing it off through a reseller network, and how the resellers and how they will monitor the reseller. And then the last one, of course, was all about commerce. How do I make sure that I can do this with commerce? Everything else was the same. And the argument was, we can't possibly be one group. We need to have separate leaders, separate entities. So it really helps with those conversations, because it really helps you almost put together this DNA like structure that says there's really not that much difference between the guy with the blue eyes and the guy with the brown eyes. It really isn't, and I think it's not so different with this, is that I would argue, you know, all businesses, regardless of industry, in my experience, and I've done a bunch of these now, there's like an 80% overlap of the things that are common. When you really get down to what's the process that you do, I am selling something to somebody, I am collecting and structure and organizing money, and I'm reporting on the performance of that money. That's it.
Sell it, fill it, and bill it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So, so we're gonna segue Jim to another section, but for those again, one more time, I'm pulling up the book here, but Jim's new book, it's exceptional. Enterprise Coherence in the Age of AI. Jim Chilton, friend and extraordinaire, leader, put all of this out there. I want to talk about something. You're obviously mentioned you're doing work with different advisory groups and things like that, and I know one of the things that you had referenced is sort of like, well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, like, you lean sometimes, I will say, with sort of maybe an AI assessment of some of these respective companies and things like that. What do you find when you do these assessments, and what kinds of things do you cover, as you kind of look at an organization in terms of its general, AI readiness?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting, is I think the depending on the areas that I start with, there is a level of implied proficiency for people who have been using technology the longest. So, as an example, if I'm talking to someone at the CTO realm and they're talking about their development team, they're talking about how they've been able to use this to generate new lines of code, how they're using this for QA, how they're using this for automation, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes down to pure measurement of what the benefits have been, it becomes much weaker. And I think what we're starting to see is that people are taking advantage of it. They're still having a really hard time associating that work with real measurable outcomes and benefits. And so, as a result of that, what I'm really pushing on is that in a level of maturity, are you experimenting or are you executing? Like if you're executing, we're talking about making something that is truly deployable, scalable, secure, and compliant for your business. So again, if you're in the medical space, this is a HIPAA compliant solution that you are leveraging. Here's how it's interfacing. Here's how it exists across your current systems, right? It's mature. It is not, I built an autonomous agent over the weekend who is now going to do our bill collections for the hospital. That's not a good answer.
Yeah,
And so
like,
what
I'll interrupt you too, but like, we're having this conversation today, Howie and I, a little bit, and it's funny. We say it sometimes, like, there's a lot of companies that leave like points on the field.
Mhm,
It's like they get it down to the 5 yard line and
mhm,
they declare victory. And it's like, and they kick their 3 points instead of getting the
mhm,
seven. And we see it all the time. It
mhm,
happened before AI, but I think AI is almost exacerbated a bit.
mhm,
Where someone talked to me today, where our head of QA had mentioned that someone wrote some code, with AI,
mhm,
and they said, "Hey, can you test this for me?" He goes, like, "What are the initial, BRD? What are your business requirements?" And the
yeah,
guy's like, "Oh yeah, I don't have one of those."
yeah,
He's like, "Well, how do I test it?" And when I
mhm,
think in this age of doing things quick and fast,
yeah,
there's still the, as you said before, governance factors here about like how
yeah,
you make sure that people are kind of thoughtfully checking the box on all elements, in the
yeah,
software development life cycle.
Well, I
yeah.
think,
And
you
I
mentioned
think
it in the book too, Jim, several times, which is like AI is kind of exposing weakness everywhere, right?
it
Because,
really is.
in a lot of the
It
initiatives
is.
that I'm involved
Yeah.
in, one of the constant items that we're dealing with, or issues that we're dealing with, is the data, right? How
Mhm,
good's the data that AI is actually working with? And so, there's a lot
yeah.
of data cleansing exercises going on, right?
Yeah.
Because AI just goes, okay, well, this is what I got.
Oh
This is
yeah.
what you get, right?
Exactly. Right. Exactly right. Yeah. And I think it is. It does. It is an accelerant for things that aren't right will surface much faster and in a way that you don't want them to. And I think this is the part I've cautioned companies about was the level of automation that they have considered. Again, augmentation, kind of super oversight by somebody, and automation, like we're going to let this thing run, is I'm like, the risk that you're taking on when you let this thing run is that you don't necessarily know the outcome or the deficiencies or the problems that could exist. And ultimately, we as technology leaders will be held accountable for those outcomes. And for any of us that have lived through breaches or incidents or major failures or major outages, that that can be career ending or reputational damage that you as the technology leader won't be able to get away from, right? And I think that's part of the thing where I'm cautioning some technology leaders, like, be very careful about what you launch. And I hate to say it, but I equate so much of this back to the enormous pressure that these technology leaders are feeling from leadership and even board leadership or private equity leadership that they've never heard from. So for years, they may not have heard from these folks, and all of a sudden now they are right there beside them going, what are you doing with AI? What benefits do we have? When are we going to have those benefits? And so I do think my concern for the technology leader is that they have not been prepared for the level of engagement and involvement that they're getting right now. And they're trying to just get them off of their back. Like, if I can just give them something, they'll leave me the hell alone until I can fortify this, until I can truly get this right. And I think that what I would encourage them is say that from the beginning. Plan now your board update, even if you're not going to the board. So I would say to all your listeners right now, if you've never been in a board meeting, great. Prepare today as if you're going to be. Prepare an update and a narrative about what are you doing, what's an experiment, and be honest about what it is. You may never deliver this, but prepare it. Because I think that transparency, because I've sat in the hot seat. I talked about this in some article I wrote recently, but I've sat in the hot seat across from really smart people. And when they start asking you questions that you cannot BS or technology talk your way out of, this is them. And let me tell you, it is not a great feeling when you're going, I don't know why I would have done that. Like, I don't think this is actually scalable. Like, how much will this cost if all 3 million people used it? I don't know. Would it work if all 3 million came at the same moment? I don't know. Like, like the I don't knows will stack up pretty damn quickly, and it is not going to be good for the people that paint themselves. And they're going to go back, throw their hands up, and be like, "God, I was just trying to get them something that says I was doing AI to get the hell off my back." I would say that is
It's
the
also feeling,
majority.
yeah, just to add like, another level of complexity to the whole equation is that, the IT group may not be the group who's even doing like some of the development work, right? So now, you might have an application that it's being developed from another department, which is great with IE support and things like that. IT, excuse me, support. But like, I think there's an underlying assumption, at least companies I've worked at historically, that even if you're not the principal developers and you're supporting it because you've got sort of some intimacy with the data or other elements of the system and things, you own it when it goes into production.
Mhm.
Like they're not going to go back to the guy in accounting who built this agent and thought it was
Yeah.
kind of cool when this thing fails and or has some catastrophic impact on the organization and things. They're going to look at you and say, "Did you test it? Did it pass muster? Did it?" So I
Yeah.
think this other challenge I think in this new world, Jim, that I know you run into is like as you create this sort of hybrid model,
Mhm.
where some things might be IT only in some respects, but a lot of things are not. A lot of things are now far more like federated in some ways.
Yeah.
Like how do you as a technology leader for those listening to us and things like, how do you kind of operate in that world where,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? You may not have complete control over, you
Huh.
not control the resources like you might in a kind of a traditional
Yeah.
fashion over
Yeah.
the last X
Yeah.
number of years.
Yeah. No, and this is where I love Figma. I love Lovable. These are the platforms where I think it allows people who do not have a technology background to build an amazing prototype to really understand and explore what they're thinking. Right. And I think those are the best tools. And I would encourage both technology people and non-technology people to explore those platforms and to really start to understand, because it will help us in the long run to be able to say, now I understand what you're looking for. Now I can fortify this thing that you've built, this model that you've demonstrated, this capability that you've described now in a way that I can hand over and actually have the bones and structure of what you're looking for. And I think it will also give, now where the people get themselves in trouble is where they go from Figma or Lovable right to production. Right. So it is great. It is great for some use cases. For full scale, full deployment, it's not, at least not yet. Right. And so I think that's an important thing, but people should be, as technology leaders, I think we need to find a process and a way we get comfortable embracing everyone in the enterprise to explore if they want to and to support them as they do and to leave them in a sandbox that is safe and secure, where companies' property, companies' intellectual capabilities are there. I think leveraging hackathons. I think about my old employer, Dassault Systems. They did it both with interns as well as employees, where once a year they would have the annual competition for the best ideas. I think this last year they generated 29 patentable ideas as a result of that. Right. So it's embracing this, because you may come up with some ideas that you're like, oh my God, we never thought of this in R&D. And again, this guy in accounting was like, this would be the best thing you could ever have created. And you're like, wow, we never thought of that. So I
It
think
is,
it's,
isn't that just like, that is got to be one of the, the unhidden, gems kind of, if you think about AI, is that, as IT leaders, I mean, like, and everyone listening to this I think would be agreeing is that, there's always too much work. There's always more work that you have available time. Right. And as a result of that, it's very, very, very common that we have a tendency to focus on what's strategic. And that makes complete sense. The challenge oftentimes is, and I think what AI is kind of exposing too, is there's tremendous opportunities within each department that oftentimes go overlooked because they're not
Mhm,
deemed strategic. They're deemed, important, but not
mhm,
critical. And I think, your point before about sort of enabling, all employees in a company, at least those that have an active interest in things, to take an active role kind of in leveraging AI and things. It's such a great opportunity to now start to address not just sort of the most strategic things, because those are somewhat obvious, but
Yeah.
obviously, those things too that improve productivity, those things that drive, reduce expenses or just make a department more efficient and things like that. So I actually think it's a incredible opportunity for all companies. Really, it's just ensuring that you've got sort of the governance and the
Mhm.
methodologies, if you will, kind of in place to kind of operate in this. No longer this sort of chain of command model, but a little
Mhm.
bit more of this semi-federated approach, if you will, and how you can ensure you, because at the end of the day, as we were saying before, you're still going to be responsible ultimately for the outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right. I think that's spot on, Brian.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, Howie, like, why don't you introduce Jim to like our one of our most favorite segments?
Oh, it's
Mm.
confession time, Jim.
Oh, geez. the the the
Favorite for our
confessional.
listeners.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
we have
My mother would
Our
be so
final and most
thrilled. Yeah, she's like, Jim's going to confession. Perfect.
we have
This
our
is
final and
overdue.
favorite
Yeah.
segment.
Uh,
We believe that we all learn more from our failures than we do our successes, and
mhm.
we've all had them. And you know, my philosophy is if you're asked if you've ever failed and you don't raise your hand, you probably lie about other things too. So, I
Yeah,
mean that
yeah,
you in the general sense, not you, Jim. But uh,
yeah,
so what
yeah.
the question that we have for you is, when you think back on your illustrious career, what is a failure that you've had that probably taught you the most?
Yeah, I think it's, and we touched upon it earlier, is that I mentioned that we talked about my kind of my first P&L opportunity, and then I went on to have two more, and one at Dassault Systems, and then again more recently with the InfoSec Institute. And I think the confession is that I was in love with the idea of running a P&L or running a business. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. So it was more than just a series of learning for me. It's ultimately what I wanted to do. Um, when I had the opportunity to either stay or go in the role, I chose to leave the role. And I did it not once, not twice, but three times. And I think it's because my confession is that I went back to what was safe, and I was known and I was proficient, because I felt like in the other roles I was I had so much more learning. I had so much more to do to be able to be proficient in those things. And would I be able to take that leap? So, and again, InfoSec Institute was the most recent example, is that, I get this incredible opportunity. We buy this cybersecurity company, the founder leaves, more than half the executive team leaves. The divisional president advocates for me to get the job. I step into the role, it's supposed to be 90 days. I do it for 19 months. Um, Best experience, right? So I'm acting as a general manager. I have to go hire a new executive team. We've bought this $200 million asset. We make 40 something $1 million a year. I've got to go meet with our customers. I need to make sure, in my mind, I'm like, as long as we don't lose money in the first year of ownership, I'll feel pretty good. We end up growing by about 12.5 to 13% that first year. The team did an amazing job. They embraced me and understand me. So 275 amazing employees that were like, we're in this together. Like, we're going to figure this the hell out, and we're going to prove that we were a good asset and that we can make this work. And I fell in love with it. And I think for me, it was hard to park the ego of executive vice president at a billion-plus-dollar company in the CTO role. It's what I knew. It's what I was comfortable with. It's what I was great at. I could do it. And the full confession is that I've had multiple opportunities to really go do stuff I would love, and I didn't have the intestinal fortitude to stick with it. Yeah, I guess that's the one that comes to mind. Yeah.
No, it's interesting for those listening. It's like you mentioned earlier about those opportunities. Like, obviously, if you can have a work with some revenue generating capability opportunities, kind of thing in your career, like go for it kind of thing. But
Oh
you're right,
yeah.
though. We're all human, right?
Uh,
And at some point, we all kind of have some levels of, I don't know, I'll say insecurity in certain
yeah.
cases,
Oh yeah.
or
Yeah.
our comfort
Yeah.
zone isn't limitless.
Yeah.
And, and I think it's great advice. And I think it's great advice, particularly in this age of AI, right? Where,
Mhm.
like, I don't want to say everyone's a beginner, but lots and lots of people are
Oh my God.
just
Yeah.
now starting to fully, go from kind of a crawl and walk model to a bit more of a jog and run.
Most of us, yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
like there are very few experts in the field. I think
Oh
of
right.
cybersecurity not being like this, if you will, 15 years ago in some respects, and how
Yeah.
much that's sort of evolved. And
Hmm.
and so if you're listening to this, it is one of those things like, you have to kind of have the maybe internal fortitude sometimes to sort of
Hmm.
realize that I think especially with AI, that people realize that, they're not expecting perfection,
Hmm.
that we are kind of operating in kind of, uncharted territory. And the expectation is that you're, putting in like significant effort that, to your point before, Jim, like I thought you said it really well too, which is, you know, have a framework, have a methodology. Like I
Hmm.
think the thing I see with AI, which, is sometimes frustrating, is that you see sometimes successes, sometimes failures, but you see a lack of consistency.
Hmm.
It's like there's not sort of this consistent pattern that you've established. It's like it's almost like each project operates on its own tenets.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think this is the part too, Brian. I love that. And I think that as someone who largely spent my career at software and tech companies, I also have to, full disclosure is that the software companies are built to go do this work. They know that they can solve a point problem. Very few of them are in the business of solving an entire process problem. And when you think about those that are most successful, is that they live in the microprocess world. And that's intentional, right? Because you don't want to get spread across too many of those things. There's very few companies that actually get spread across multiple things. And if we recall, most of them are the series of acquisitions of those things they brought together.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely.
so
Right.
when you think
You
about
get
the
some
industry,
some Stonian
yeah,
thing with, stitches.
exactly.
I always have flashbacks
Yeah,
to
yeah.
some old
And so when you think
companies that
about
used to do
this
this.
industry, the industry is kind of built against us in this model of actually where do the shared parts fit together, and how do you ultimately navigate those as a technology leader? And so I do think it's the acknowledgement of these facts. I think for me as a technology leader will help others as well, because I do think it gives you some sort of structure for a meaningful conversation. It gets you off of your heels and onto your toes about I have an approach, albeit imperfect. I have information, albeit imperfect, but I have a method to go forward with this rather than just sit back and just get pelted every day with some sort of new initiative that came out of God knows where for God knows what. And so I think for me, if when I was writing the book, that was the thing I was thinking about. I was genuinely thinking about people like us, CIOs and technology leaders who are just getting pelted today with things. And like, if for the love of God, if I can get some structure into them that allows them to have just some sort of backstop that says, let's talk about this logically just for a minute. Like, what do we think this investment in these technologies can and should do for a company to produce what outcome? Give me a fundamental hypothesis. And if you can't, let me at least raise a hypothesis about what I think it could be. And I think that alone is so meaningful to me, because I think there is not a technology leader I've talked to in the last 2 years who has not fully disclosed their vulnerability, their insecurity, and the constant challenge. And some so deeply that either have lost their jobs over it, are worried about losing their jobs over it, and are genuinely losing sleep night after night about, like, what the hell do I do with the situation I find myself in? Because for most of them, this is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what would you say to them in that case? I mean, so how do you, you get a senior level leader, they're kind of either company maybe is sort of,
Mm,
pivoting to AI. They're going to make this like
mm.
a strategic initiative. You mentioned the boards, to getting pressure from the board or
Yeah,
others,
yeah. Mm,
to kind of like turn up the speed of execution
yeah,
and whatnot. Like, what's your suggestion to
yeah.
technology
To
leaders to sort of
to
how they about best to sort of engage and embrace this?
Yeah. two, maybe three things that I've offered as advice, and again, may or may not be perfect, but I think that the first one is get your insatiable curiosity going. Whether you want to be an expert or aware of these tools or not, you need to be. Go dig in nights and weekends and work with these tools that if you don't know how to work with Figma or Lovable or local GPT or different engines, if you haven't if you haven't loaded up Llama and actually done some work on your own machine and worked with different LLMs, go do that work. Like, as someone who hasn't written a line of code in 20 years, I've been doing it. It's a great education. It gets you back at your roots, right? So first thing is, go dig in. You can't complain about this stuff and then not dig in. So dig in, and there's some very cool open source stuff out there. It's easy to get to, and there's a million people that will help you set it up. It's job one. So take accountability. Job two, and again, whether it's the framework I suggest or any framework, have some structure and approach that you can convey to your CEO and your board. Something that says, here's what we're doing. Here's the things I've thought about. I have to have some governance. I have to have some intention. I have to have some project structure. Like, just, it doesn't have to be perfect, but have an idea, and then be very honest about the difference between an experimentation and a full project that you're executing on and looking for an ROI. I think those are the key things, Brian, so that you can really take this thing and grab a hold of it and then go work on it. I think the biggest mistake, maybe for some of the listeners, is they're waiting for it to get worse before they build that deck. And they shouldn't. They should be doing it now before they're asked. They should assume that the three of us are asking them. I'm begging them to do it. Because if I jump ahead to the private equity work that I'm doing now and helping these companies, 9 out of 9 are questioning their technology leadership and what they're doing around AI.
Yeah. Yeah.
9 out of 9. And so they want to understand. And I'm like, nobody, to your point, nobody knows, nobody's perfect. And I respond to all of them that way. So before you start second guessing your technology leader and looking for that non-existent AI proficienado, or worse, go hire an AI PhD that will navel gaze until the cows come home. Like, go like, get a hot minute to understand this. And by the way, I've said the same thing to CEOs. I'm like, if you've never used Lovable, if you've never understood the power of Claude, you should be in it too, because they should be able to challenge us. They should be able to come into you or any one of us and be like, I was playing with this stupid thing over the weekend, guys. Why can we not use it for this? And you can help educate them. So often technology leaders are like, oh, the CEO and the board doesn't really care what I do. Now they care. We have a vehicle to communicate and share. And now we're like, oh, geez, I'm overwhelmed. I have to respond to them. I'm like, for God's sake, you've been waiting for years for them to engage and care what we do. They now care. This is it.
Yeah, you know what I think? Jim, you know what I think is interesting? It's if you think about it, it's like out of the role of the CIO, CTO, if you will, if you look at the C-suite in general, I mean, it continues to change on such a more, exponential pace than you would find in some of these other areas. And the one thing I always, think is, kind of remarkable, if you will, is like, you really need to be a chameleon, right? Like, if you're a CIO, it's like, I mean, you think back to our early days, your career, working with printers and evolving things, like so much of it initially was like, how do I move from operations to, having a more holistic, maybe software background, and then how do I evolve from software to kind of running a P&L? And it's like, oh my gosh, how do I do mobile apps? How do I do cybersecurity? And how do I handle large websites and other things like that? And now it's just the next one, but to me, it's a little bit different too, because it almost goes back. It's almost like it's the new thing, but it's also an expectation that you're hands-on. Like, I think being a CIO and being comfortable in the position of just being a thought leader, let's call it. And I don't mean saying that negatively at all, but just being a thought leader without being somewhat of a hands-on thought leader, But, I just don't think it's good enough almost anymore. Just to kind of,
Yeah.
even like
Oh
the
yeah.
largest companies, it's very difficult to just speak about these things, from as if you kind of read them in a book, because your boss could have just picked it up on the weekend and started working with it. When you're asking lots of questions and you're like, geez, I haven't like really looked at that, but I've got a really good CTO who understands all of it.
Yeah.
It doesn't reflect well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. And I think every listener of this show needs to be out in front of this, not behind it. And you need to be forced. I mean, you really need to be as forceful as you can. I know that with the company I was working at before, is that, you know, literally a week after OpenAI was released, I brought that into the executive team meeting that week. And everybody's like, oh, and I wrote on the whiteboard, I'm like, our world has just changed. And again, we're a content business. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, we'll look at it. No, I'm like, no, no, no. At lunchtime, I'm logging each of you in, and you're going to ask it to do what we do for a living. I want you to ask it to give us a final exam for Economics 101 based under Greg Mankiw, and watch it produce one. And then tell me how, in that 30 seconds or less that it took to do that, how we could spend so much money perfecting something like that for our higher education customers. And that was the reality moment of, oh my God, this is a big deal. And then it's like, okay, here's what Chegg is doing with this technology, and this is what it will mean for learners and students. And for us in that world, the first adopters were students. Hands down.
Right.
The first
Yeah,
people
they
out of the
went at it.
gate were students. They were using it for everything. And so academia was behind, the faculty was behind, the providers of solutions were behind. So it was and I think, Brian, as you pointed out, that's why right in the beginning of this is that for what I was doing then, we had to be very much on top of it, but I had to be persistent. And I think that as a technology leader, you owe it to yourself to be persistent on this topic. Let somebody tell you at the board or CEO level, thank you for the update. That's all I need for now. Great answer. Great answer. Having it the other way around, to your point, they played on it all weekend and they're asking you and you're flat footed. All of a sudden now, over one moment, years of your service is now vulnerable because you didn't answer the question. Because now they're like, oh, well, do I know more about it than this guy does? That is not what you want them thinking. And they shouldn't. They shouldn't know more about it than you do.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's fascinating stuff. Well, Jim, thank you so much, and
Yeah, of
love having
course.
you on. You're a wealth of information. As I said earlier, Jim and I have known each other for many years, and I've always held them in such high regard. So,
Oh, well,
Yeah,
thank
we'll have
you.
to do this
Too
again,
kind.
Jim. Maybe a little bit
Yeah,
later
no,
in the
it's,
year. We'll
it,
do an update on where everything's
yeah,
at here.
yeah. Well, it's an absolute pleasure, gentlemen. I appreciate it. I appreciate the kind words. I love the engagement. And yeah, like I said, at my core, I love the idea of this show being able to help people navigate this. This is a tough time for people in our profession. And I think if we can do stuff between the book that I put together, the show that you're putting together, these folks generally need and want help to navigate these times. And if we can do that, then I think we definitely should.
I love it. I love it. Well, there you have it, folks. Jim Chilton, business and tech advisor, board member, author, Enterprise Coherence. Buy it on Amazon. Get the book and access to the macro process wheel, the 5 pillars, all the things. Jim, how can people contact you?
Um, Jim, Jim _Chilton at outlook.com. Yeah, actually, if they go to the Wacro Process website, they'll be able to find me there too. So yeah,
Okay.
it's
All right. There you go.
yeah,
Get the book. Get the book. Get access to the MPW site, and
yeah,
you'll be off and running. Well, thanks,
yeah,
Jim.
exactly.
And before we close,
It's
I'll
a
just
pleasure,
leave you
guys.
with the quote of the day. Quote, AI doesn't fail because it's too advanced. It fails because our org charts aren't built for it. Said by our own Brian Shield.
Like that.
And we are out.